Imagine this, a summer night in America in 1797. A man sits alone in his study, candlelight flickering on pages he's written and rewritten countless times. His hands are shaking. He knows what he's about to do will destroy him. His wife and children will read this. His enemies will celebrate. His friends will turn their backs on him. But still, he takes the pages and walks out into the Philadelphia night, looking for a printing press to publish his confession. His name is Alexander Hamilton, and in his hands is a 95-page document detailing his own adultery, his own weakness, his own betrayal, in more explicit and humiliating detail than any American politician has ever dared. Why would one of America's most powerful men deliberately destroy his own reputation? Why would a genius, a founding father, the man who built America's financial system from scratch, give his enemies the weapon that would end his political career forever? Because 6 years earlier, on another summer night, there had been a knock on his door. A beautiful young woman, a story of abandonment, a moment of weakness. And that single moment would turn into blackmail, political warfare, and the most explosive scandal in early American history. This is the story of the Hamilton-Reynolds Scandal, America's first great political sex scandal. And I promise you, it's far crazier than what you learned in history class. To understand how catastrophic this scandal was, you need to understand who Alexander Hamilton was in the 1790s. He wasn't just an ordinary politician. He was the man who essentially invented America's financial system. As the nation's first Treasury Secretary, Hamilton created the U.S. Mint, established the first Bank of the United States, and designed a powerful framework that would transform 13 struggling colonies into an economic powerhouse. When Hamilton spoke about money, Congress listened. When he wrote policy papers, they became law. He was intelligent, ambitious, and ruthlessly effective. He had fought in the Revolutionary War as George Washington's right-hand man. He was co-author of the Federalist Papers, essentially a user manual for the U.S. Constitution. In his mid-30s, Hamilton was one of the most influential people in America, probably second only to President Washington. But what set Hamilton apart from other founding fathers was this: he wasn't born into wealth or privilege. He was an immigrant, born out of wedlock on a small island in the Caribbean, orphaned at a young age. Everything he achieved, he climbed to through pure intelligence and relentless work. For him, reputation wasn't just important. It was everything. It was the only legacy he could leave to his children. And he was about to risk it all. It was the year 1791. Hamilton was living in Philadelphia, which was the nation's capital at the time. His wife, Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton, known as Eliza, was from one of New York's wealthiest and most respected families. She was intelligent, devoted, and by all accounts, Hamilton adored her. Together they had 4 children, with more on the way. By every measure, Hamilton had a perfect life, power, respect, a loving family, and a brilliant career. But in the summer of 1791, Eliza took the children to visit her family in Albany, New York, as she did most summers to escape Philadelphia's brutal heat and frequent yellow fever outbreaks. Hamilton stayed behind, working as always, drowning in paperwork and political battles. And that's when Maria Reynolds entered his life. Now, before we go any further, if you're enjoying this deep dive into one of history's most scandalous moments, make sure you subscribe. We cover stories they never taught you in history class, and believe me, it gets even more dramatic from here. On a hot summer evening, there was a knock at the door. Hamilton was home, probably reviewing documents or writing one of his endless policy papers, when someone came wanting to speak with him privately. It was a young woman, probably in her early 20s, blonde, and according to Hamilton's later description, in serious distress. Her name was Maria Reynolds. She told Hamilton a story that would break anyone's heart. Her husband James Reynolds had abandoned her and their young daughter. She was alone in Philadelphia, had no money, no family nearby, and was desperate. She had heard that Alexander Hamilton was a kind and generous man. Could he help her? Now, here's where we need to be careful about Maria Reynolds. Throughout much of American history, she's been portrayed either as a seductress who trapped Hamilton or as a helpless victim used by her husband. The truth, as always, is probably more complex. What we know for certain is this: Maria Reynolds was a real person with a real daughter living in genuinely difficult circumstances. Whether she came to Hamilton on her own initiative or was sent by her husband as part of a scheme remains one of the scandal's greatest mysteries. Some historians believe she was complicit from the start. Others argue she was a victim of both her husband and Hamilton. The honest answer is we'll probably never know for certain. What Hamilton himself later claimed was this: he took pity on her. He gave her $30, a significant sum in 1791, enough to secure temporary housing. And then, according to his own account, the woman made it clear through her behavior and conversation that she was open to more than just financial assistance. Here's how Hamilton himself later described it: quoting from his published confession. In her distress, she made it quite clear that consolation of a different kind would also be acceptable. Hamilton, alone in Philadelphia, flattered by a young woman's attention, made a choice. That evening or shortly after, he began an affair with Maria Reynolds. And here's the important thing. Hamilton knew this was wrong. He knew it was dangerous. He knew he was risking everything. But he did it anyway. The affair continued for months. Maria had rented a small house in Philadelphia, and Hamilton visited her there. Throughout the fall and winter of 1791, they met secretly, again and again. Hamilton was meticulous about most aspects of his life, but in this matter he seemed careless. He wrote notes. He visited openly enough that neighbors could see. He was playing with fire. And then, in December 1791, James Reynolds reappeared. Suddenly, the abandoned husband was back, and he was devastated, absolutely devastated, to discover his wife had been unfaithful. He wrote Hamilton a letter full of wounded pride and righteous anger. How could Hamilton, a man in such a position, betray another man this way? Dishonor, disgrace. But Reynolds was willing to be reasonable. He didn't want to destroy Hamilton's reputation. He didn't want to cause a scandal. He just wanted compensation, financial compensation, for his pain and suffering. James Reynolds was blackmailing Alexander Hamilton. And here's the really interesting part. Hamilton paid. He didn't pay once. He paid again and again for over a year. The amounts varied, sometimes $30, sometimes $100, sometimes more. In total, Hamilton would pay James Reynolds over $1,000, an enormous sum in 1790s money. Now you might be thinking, why would Hamilton, one of America's smartest men, agree to submit to blackmail? Why didn't he end the affair, confess to his wife, and deal with the personal consequences privately? Here's why. Hamilton was Treasury Secretary. He was responsible for the entire nation's finances. He already had enemies in Congress accusing him of financial corruption, saying he was using his position to enrich himself and his friends. If it came out that he was making secret payments to a man named James Reynolds, his political rivals would immediately assume the payments were connected to his official duties. They would accuse him of embezzlement, fraud, or worse. So Hamilton paid the blackmail because he thought it was the safer scandal. It was better to be someone who committed adultery than a corrupt official stealing from the American people. It was better to sacrifice his personal honor rather than his professional reputation. But here's the interesting thing. Hamilton couldn't completely leave Maria. Even after James Reynolds discovered the affair, even after the blackmail started, Hamilton continued to see Maria. According to Hamilton's later account, Maria claimed she was afraid of her husband, that James resorted to violence, that she needed Hamilton's protection and consolation. We can't know if this was true or part of a carefully crafted con, but Hamilton apparently believed it or wanted to believe it. So now Hamilton wasn't just paying blackmail. He was continuing the affair with the blackmailer's wife. The blackmailer knew it, and he was accepting payment for it. This situation may seem strange, complicated, and frankly stupid, because it was. Let's pause for a second because this is getting crazy. If you think this seems like something out of a Netflix drama, you're not wrong. Make sure you hit the like button because we're about to get into how this private mess turned into a very public disaster. For about a year, this twisted arrangement continued. Hamilton paid James Reynolds. Hamilton continued to see Maria Reynolds. And somehow, incredibly, it remained secret. But in November 1792, James Reynolds was arrested. He and an accomplice were caught, ironically, trying to defraud the Treasury Department by claiming back wages owed to Revolutionary War veterans. When Reynolds went to jail, he did what any good con artist would do. He started bargaining. He told those who arrested him that he had damaging information about a high-ranking government official. I have documents about a very important man. This man is Alexander Hamilton. I have letters and documents showing he's conducting illegal money dealings. This caught the attention of 3 members of Congress, James Monroe, Abraham Venable, and Frederick Muhlenberg. These weren't random congressmen. Monroe and Venable were members of the Democratic Republicans, the political party opposed to Hamilton's Federalists. They were already suspicious of Hamilton's financial policies and would love to find evidence of corruption. In December 1792, these 3 congressmen visited Hamilton's home, with documents provided by James Reynolds. The documents showed Hamilton had made secret payments to Reynolds and that he might be involved in some kind of financial scheme. Imagine that moment. 3 hostile congressmen show up at your door with evidence that you've made mysterious payments to a known con artist. Your career is about to end. You're about to be accused of corruption at the highest level. Everything you've built is about to collapse. Hamilton made a decision. He told them everything. He explained that the payments had nothing to do with his official duties. They were blackmail payments. He had an affair with Reynolds' wife. He showed them letters from Maria, notes arranging their meetings, correspondence that made the nature of their relationship very clear. It was humiliating, but it proved the payments were personal, not professional corruption. The three congressmen seemed satisfied. Monroe, despite being Hamilton's political enemy, acknowledged this was a private matter, not a case of official misconduct. They promised to keep the information confidential. Hamilton thought the crisis was over. But he was wrong. For the next 5 years, rumors circulated. Whispers in political circles, innuendo in opposition newspapers. Hamilton had many enemies, and they had heard fragments of the story. But without proof, without documents, they couldn't make explicit accusations. Then, in 1797, a journalist named James Callender published a pamphlet. Callender was a scandal hunter, a political hit man who specialized in destroying reputations. Somehow he had obtained information about the Reynolds affair, probably leaked by James Monroe or one of his associates, though Monroe always denied this. Callender's pamphlet accused Hamilton of financial speculation and corruption involving James Reynolds. It danced carefully around the affair itself but strongly implied official misconduct. Hamilton was no longer in government at this point. He had resigned as Treasury Secretary in 1795 and returned to his law practice in New York. But his reputation still mattered. He was still an important figure in American politics, and many expected he might run for president someday. Hamilton had 3 options. He could ignore the accusations and allow people to believe he was corrupt. He could issue a general denial and hope the story would fade. Or he could tell the complete, unvarnished truth. But he chose the truth. In August 1797, Hamilton published a 95-page pamphlet that went down in history as the Reynolds pamphlet, though its official title was much longer and more formal. In it, Hamilton confessed everything. He described meeting Maria Reynolds, starting the affair, paying blackmail to James Reynolds, and continuing the affair even after the blackmail began. As evidence, he included actual letters from Maria and James Reynolds. To clear himself of official corruption charges, he left out no detail. It was the most detailed, explicit confession of adultery ever published by an American public figure. Nothing like this had ever been done before. Now here's the thing about the Reynolds pamphlet. It was both brilliant and catastrophic. It was brilliant because it completely neutralized the corruption charges. No one could read that pamphlet and believe Hamilton had stolen government money. He had definitively proven his relationship with the Reynolds was personal, not professional. But it was catastrophic because he had published a detailed confession of adultery with evidence for the entire country to read. His wife's name was in it. His children could read it. Friends, enemies, random people on the street, everyone now knew the intimate details of his infidelity. Political rivals celebrated. Newspapers mocked him mercilessly. One cartoon showed Hamilton writing at a desk while the ghost of his reputation floated away. Another depicted him in bed with Mrs. Reynolds while her husband counted money. The man who had been so careful about his public image had destroyed it with his own pen. But Hamilton's logic was clear. If tragic, he preferred to be known as an adulterer rather than as a corrupt official. He preferred to sacrifice his personal honor rather than have people question his financial integrity during his time in government. In Hamilton's mind, his work, his policies, his contribution to building the American economy, this legacy had to be protected, even if it meant degrading himself and his family. The question is, was he right? Now let's talk about Eliza Hamilton, because she's the one who paid the highest price for Alexander's choices. Eliza had already endured so much. She had supported Hamilton through years of grueling work, raised their children largely alone while he was absorbed in his career, and managed their household under constant financial stress because Hamilton, no matter his importance, was never personally wealthy. And now this. Not just the private betrayal of the affair, but the public humiliation of having it published for the world to read. We don't have much direct record of Eliza's immediate reaction. She didn't publish her own pamphlet or give interviews. She was a private person dealing with a very public humiliation. But we know some things. First, she didn't leave him. In an age when divorce was rare but not impossible, especially for a woman from a powerful family like the Schuylers, Eliza chose to stay. Whether this was love, duty, religious conviction, concern for the children, or a combination of all these things, we can't know for certain. Second, years later, after Hamilton's death, Eliza would spend 50 years preserving his legacy, collecting his papers, defending his reputation, and promoting his contributions to America. She forgave him, though we can never fully know what that forgiveness cost her. But in the immediate aftermath of the Reynolds pamphlet, the damage to their marriage must have been severe. There's some evidence Eliza took the children back to Albany again, putting physical distance between herself and Alexander while the scandal raged. Friends reported Hamilton was depressed, aware he had hurt the person he loved most. Now, politically, the consequences of the Reynolds pamphlet were exactly what you'd expect. it ended Hamilton's chances of ever becoming president. Before the scandal, Hamilton was definitely a potential presidential candidate. He was young enough, influential enough, and popular enough in Federalist circles to imagine running for president in 1800 or 1804. The Reynolds pamphlet killed that possibility completely. American voters in the 1790s could forgive a lot of things, but a published, detailed confession of adultery? No, that was unacceptable. Hamilton had made himself unelectable. But the deeper tragedy is this: Hamilton's decision to publish the pamphlet didn't even achieve its main goal. Despite his confession, his political enemies continued to attack him, continued to question his motives, continued to undermine his influence. The Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson, won the presidency in 1800. Hamilton's Federalist Party began a slow decline. The economic policies Hamilton had fought so hard to establish were under constant attack, and Hamilton himself became increasingly angry and reckless. In 1804, just 7 years after publishing the Reynolds pamphlet, Alexander Hamilton would make another disastrous decision, accepting a duel with Aaron Burr. That duel would end his life at age 49, leaving Eliza a widow with 7 children. Sometimes historians wonder, did the humiliation of the Reynolds scandal contribute to Hamilton's death? Did the man who was once so careful, so calculating, become careless about his own life after destroying his own reputation? We can't know for certain, but it's hard not to see a connection between the man who published his own shame in 1797 and the man who threw away his life in a pointless duel in 1804. So why does this scandal matter as more than just juicy historical drama? Because the Hamilton-Reynolds affair established patterns we still follow today. It was America's first great political sex scandal, and it created precedents that have echoed in every scandal since. First, it established the idea that private behavior matters for public figures. Hamilton tried to separate his personal failings from his professional competence, but the public wouldn't allow it. Whether you're a founding father or a modern president, Americans have always believed that character and private behavior reflect fitness for office. Second, it showed that the cover-up can be worse than the crime. Hamilton's affair was destructive, but his decision to publish the Reynolds pamphlet, his attempt to manage the scandal, was what truly destroyed him. From Watergate to modern controversies, every political scandal since has proven the same principle. It's not just what you did, but how you handle it when you're caught. Third, it revealed that blackmail and scandal could be weaponized for political purposes. James Reynolds wasn't just an opportunistic con artist. He and his wife, whether intentionally or not, became tools in the larger political war between Federalists and Democratic Republicans. Every opposition research team, every political hit job, every leaked scandal in American politics traces back, in some way, to this template. And finally, it showed that even intelligent people can make catastrophically stupid decisions when sex and power are involved. Hamilton was a genius about finance, about political strategy, about building institutions, but he was extraordinarily bad at managing his personal life. This contradiction, between public competence and private failure, is something we've seen in countless leaders since. So here's what we're left with: Alexander Hamilton, an intelligent, flawed, deeply human figure who helped create America and nearly destroyed himself in the process. The Reynolds affair didn't erase his achievements. The U.S. financial system he built still works. The institutions he created still exist. But the scandal guaranteed his story would always be complicated, always cautionary. Eliza Hamilton, for her part, had the last word. After Hamilton's death, she lived another 50 years, until 1854. She outlived most of the founders, outlived the scandal, outlived everyone who mocked her husband. And she spent those decades relentlessly defending Alexander's legacy, making sure the world remembered his contributions, not just his failures. In the end, she succeeded. We remember Hamilton as a founder, a genius, the architect of American finance. But we also remember Hamilton as the adulterer, the scandal-ridden man, the man who published his own shame. Because that's the price of the Reynolds pamphlet. Hamilton guaranteed his financial integrity would be remembered, but he also guaranteed we would never forget his personal failure. History doesn't let us choose what people will remember. It keeps everything. So here's my question for you. Do you think Hamilton made the right choice by publishing the Reynolds pamphlet? Should he have stayed silent and let people think he was corrupt? Or was protecting his professional legacy worth destroying his personal reputation? Let me know in the comments, because this is a debate historians are still having 2 centuries later. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's messiest scandals, make sure you subscribe. We cover the stories they didn't teach you in school, the human drama behind the history books. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and remember, even the people on monuments and currency were just people, trying to deal with impossible choices, often failing, occasionally succeeding, always human.